Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Astrology News Report, an alternate view of world events as seen through the lens of Vedic astrology, presented by yours truly, Ron Berger. Today is March 19th, 2017. In this segment, we'll take a look at the week that was and see how the planets' patterns in the zodiac matched up with the past week's events. Venus has been retrograde for the past couple of weeks. When the planet of value and finances is going backwards in the zodiac, it's a poor time for doing things with money, since the true value of stuff is harder to determine. Last week, Venus was conjunct Mercury, the planet of rational thinking and making decisions. Mercury is considered debilitated in the sign Pisces. So, last week, the Trump administration put out its first budget, and no surprise, the drastic changes compared to the usual federal budget got everyone's dander up. But of course, POTUS was very pleased with his first effort. No money for the arts, no money for public TV, no more climate research funding, no more Meals on Wheels, and major haircuts for the EPA, and even major reductions for the State Department, which brought assurances from the likes of Republican Senate Leader Mitch McConnell that there was no way this budget was going to pass in its present form. By the way, Venus is also the planet of compromise and agreement. When it is retrograde, agreement is hard to come by. So, it looks like it's time for some serious arm twisting and sausage making. Trump can't seem to catch a break. Last week, his revised travel ban executive order got blocked by 2 federal judges. Seems some of the problems of the original travel ban, struck down by federal judges, are still there in this version number 2. Note that Jupiter, planet of judges and judgment, is retrograde. In other words, going back over things. Jupiter is opposite to Uranus, the planet of freedom. Since it is the planet of freedom, Uranus represents refugees. So, chalk one up for the refugees. It didn't help that Trump campaigned on a Muslim ban. All through 2016, he was yelling, "Ban the Muslims." Just like with travel ban number 1, this one too, blocked by federal judges who cited Trump's own words as exhibit number 1. Note that, in Trump's natal chart, he has Jupiter, planet of beliefs, in his second house of speech. So, he speaks his beliefs. But since Neptune, planet of illusions, is there as well, he's somewhat deluded. Jupiter also rules the 8th house of a Leo rising chart, the house of chronic problems. So in an interesting way, speaking his beliefs becomes his own undoing. Rudy Giuliani famously bragged that Trump had asked him how to craft a ban that would pass legal muster, a comment that, ironically, has now made it much harder for Trump's order to get through the courts. Going back to Trump's chart, we see how his natal Venus, the planet of guidance and counsel, is conjunct Saturn, the planet representing his 6th house of struggle and difficulties, both placed in his 12th house of conspiracies and loss. In other words, conspiring with his own advisors ends up causing him loss. Trump's wiretap allegation scandal continued to grow legs last week. This was too juicy a story to give up on, so all through the week, at every opportunity, journalists kept bringing it up. At every White House press conference, reporters plagued Sean Spicer with their questioning, which brought even more squirming and wiggling around as the press secretary gamely tried to defend his boss, essentially inferring that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Seeking to put an end to all this madness, the heads of the Congressional Intelligence Committees met with James Comey, head of the FBI, who assured them he had no evidence to support Trump's assertion that the Obama administration wiretapped Trump Tower. Finally, after nobody could substantiate his claims, Trump comes clean, admitting that his source was something he heard mentioned on Fox News. All of this was foretold by the planetary pattern created by Uranus, planet of shocking events, and Mercury, planet of facts and reasons, and the news, opposing Jupiter. Jupiter is the planet of truth and beliefs, and it is retrograde, in other words, backwards, and therefore not reliable. But then, what is it that prompts the president to say such things? As we might expect, there's a clue in his natal chart. See how Saturn, the planet that signifies fear, is also the ruler of his 6th house of enemies, and is placed in his 12th house of the subconscious. Also note how Venus, the planet of advice and advisors, is conjunct his natal Saturn, making him suspicious of anyone trying to tell him anything. In other words, our president suffers from paranoia. The action planet Mars is in Aries, which is good for taking action, initiating new projects, moving forward. On the downside, Mars in Aries is impatient, moves too fast, and can run into trouble. Simultaneously, Venus, the planet of compromise and agreement, is retrograde, which is bad for compromise. Mars doesn't care to compromise anyway. So, there's a lot of energy for forcing the situation, even when agreement is not forthcoming. People tend to choose one side or the other, meaning for anybody or anything that requires finding common ground, there's not much hope at this time. The long-awaited Republican replacement for Obamacare, called the American Health Care Act, now dubbed Ryan Care, but also known as Trump Care, got introduced while these planetary patterns were in progress. Also, Venus is the planet of value, in other words, what's it worth? When Venus is retrograde, it's hard to determine the true value of something, the true cost. And of course, last week, that was a big part of the whole discussion. Who pays, who gains, who loses in this GOP healthcare plan? So, unsurprisingly, the new AHCA was pronounced DOA by both true blue conservatives who still object to giving poor people any kind of handout, and the progressives fearful of a backlash from their own constituencies. By the end of the week, even its main proponent, Paul Ryan, was admitting that some modifications would be necessary. Is there any hope for the Republicans' health care plan? Well, not while Venus is retrograde, and then, in a couple of weeks, Mercury goes retrograde. That won't help either. So, at the least, we'll have to wait until May. That'll do it for this week's Review of the Week, but before leaving, please listen to my little pitch for donations. It takes time and trouble to put these videos together. If you appreciate what this YouTube channel does for you, please help keep it going by visiting the donation page and making a contribution. Thanks, and until next week.